Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of our English Learning Podcast. My name is Natasha, and I'll be your host. I'm really happy you are here because today we're going to talk about something that has been a part of people's lives for centuries. The topic is why reading books is important. Now, maybe you're someone who loves reading, or maybe you prefer watching movies, listening to music, or scrolling on your phone. That's okay. But today I want to explore the idea that reading is more than just a hobby. Reading can actually change the way we think, the way we learn, and even the way we connect with other people. Let's begin with a very simple thought. When was the last time you picked up a book? Maybe it was a novel, a storybook, or even something related to your studies or work. Some of you may say, "Oh, I haven't read in a long time." Others may say, "Yes, I just finished one last week." Wherever you are, that's completely fine, because the goal here is not to judge, but to understand why reading can play an important role in our lives. So, let's look at the first big reason. Reading improves our vocabulary and language skills. This is especially important for you as English learners. Think about it. When you read, you are exposed to new words, new expressions, and even new sentence structures. For example, if you read a novel, you might come across words like whispered, shouted, sighed, or exclaimed. You not only learn what those words mean, but you also see them in context, inside a story. That makes it easier to remember them and later use them in your own conversations. Another point is that reading makes you more creative. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're reading a fantasy novel, maybe something like Harry Potter. When you read, you create pictures in your head. You imagine the castle, the characters, the magic. This kind of imagination doesn't happen the same way when you watch a movie, because in a movie, the pictures are already made for you. Reading forces your brain to be active, to imagine, and to create. That's a kind of mental exercise. Now let's connect this to daily life. You might be thinking, "Okay, Natasha, but I don't have time to read." This is something many of us say. Life can be busy. We have school, work, house chores, friends, family, and even social media. But reading doesn't always mean spending hours with a heavy book. It can be small and simple. For example, reading 10 minutes before going to sleep, or reading a short article in the morning instead of only checking your phone notifications. These little habits can add up over time and make a real difference. Another reason why reading is important is because it helps us to relax. In today's world, people are often stressed and tired. Reading can be a way to escape from daily problems. Imagine you had a very busy day at work or school, and then you sit down in the evening with a book. For half an hour, your mind leaves the stress behind and enters a different world. This kind of relaxation is not only enjoyable but also healthy. It helps to reduce anxiety and improves your overall mood. Reading also improves focus and concentration. In the age of smartphones, many of us find it hard to focus for more than a few minutes. Scrolling through videos, notifications, and messages makes our attention very short. But when you read, you train your mind to stay with one thing for a longer time. For example, if you read for 20 minutes without looking at your phone, you are already practicing concentration. This is a skill that helps not only with reading, but also in studying, working, and even listening to people in real conversations. And here's another interesting point. Reading helps us understand people better. Books, especially novels and biographies, show us different perspectives. You may read about someone who lives in a different country or someone who has gone through a completely different experience than yours. By following their story, you begin to understand their feelings, their struggles, and their dreams. This builds empathy, and empathy, the ability to understand others, is one of the most valuable human skills. Now, let's connect this again to English learning. If you read books in English, even simple ones, you not only improve your vocabulary, but also learn about culture. For example, if you read To Kill a Mockingbird or Pride and Prejudice, You are not only learning words, but also seeing how people lived, thought, and spoke in another time. This gives you a deeper understanding of the language and the culture behind it. So, to sum up so far, reading improves language, builds creativity, reduces stress, increases focus, and grows empathy. And the best part? It's something you can do almost anywhere. On the bus, in the park, before bed, or even while waiting in a line. Let me share a little story from my own life. When I was younger, I didn't really like reading. I thought it was boring. But one day my teacher gave me a book called The Little Prince. At first I wasn't very interested, but slowly I started enjoying it. I realized that the book wasn't just a story about a prince and planets. It was about friendship, love, and life. That book made me fall in love with reading. And from then on, I understood that books are not just about words on a page. They are about ideas, feelings, and connections. Now, I want you to think about this. What is one book that has stayed with you, or that you would like to read in the future? This could be a storybook, a novel, or even a self-help book. Think about why it matters to you. So let's keep exploring this wonderful world of reading. Earlier, I mentioned that books can improve language skills, creativity, focus, and empathy. But there are still so many more ways that reading shapes us as human beings. Let's dive deeper into some of them, and I'll connect each idea to everyday situations that you might experience. One powerful reason to read is that books give us knowledge. Think about how much information is hidden inside the pages of a single book. If you pick up a history book, you can travel through time. If you pick up a science book, you can learn about how the world works, from the stars in the sky to the tiny cells in your body. If you read a book about business, you can learn how companies succeed or fail. Every book is like a doorway that opens into another world, another idea, or another skill. Here's an example. Imagine you are interested in cooking. You could, of course, watch videos or follow short recipes online. But reading a cookbook or a food memoir gives you more than just instructions. It teaches you the story of food, the culture behind the dishes, and sometimes even the emotions connected to flavors and traditions. That deeper knowledge enriches your cooking experience and makes you feel more connected to what you are doing. Reading also builds discipline. Now you might ask, Natasha, how can reading a book build discipline? Well, let's think about it. When you decide to read a book, you are committing yourself to a journey that takes time. You cannot finish most books in just one sitting. It takes days or weeks. By coming back to the book every day, by turning a few pages at a time, you are training yourself to be consistent. And consistency is a key skill in many areas of life. Whether you are learning English, practicing music, or working on fitness goals. Reading teaches you patience and commitment little by little. Let's connect this to daily life. Imagine you are a student who needs to prepare for exams. If you are already used to reading books regularly, it will be easier for you to sit down and focus on your textbooks or notes. Your brain has already learned the habit of reading and absorbing information. On the other hand, if you almost never read, studying for a long time can feel painful and boring. So, reading in your free time can actually help you become a better learner in school or university. Now let's talk about mental health. Books can play a very surprising role here. Sometimes people think reading is only about gaining knowledge. But books can also be like friends. For example, self-help books can give you advice when you're struggling. Biographies can inspire you by showing how other people overcame difficulties. Even novels can make you feel less alone, because you see characters going through experiences that may be similar to your own. Imagine reading a story about a character who feels lonely or nervous or misunderstood. When you see how they face those feelings, it gives you comfort and maybe even strategies to manage your own challenges. Reading is also one of the best ways to improve memory. Our brains are like muscles. The more we use them, the stronger they get. When you read, you are constantly remembering characters, details, plots, and ideas. For example, in a mystery novel, you might need to remember clues from earlier chapters in order to understand the big twist at the end. This constant exercise of memory is actually good for your brain's health, and it may even protect you from memory problems later in life. Here's a story I'd like to share. A friend of mine told me about his grandmother. She is in her 80s, and every night she reads for about an hour before bed. She doesn't just read light stories. Sometimes she reads history, philosophy, or biographies. She says reading makes her feel alive, connected, and curious, even at her age. And interestingly, her memory is still very sharp. She can remember details from books she read many years ago. That shows us how reading can keep our minds active and healthy even as we grow older. Another important reason to read is that books can inspire action. For example, you might read a book about someone who traveled the world, and that could make you curious about traveling too. You might read about a scientist and then feel motivated to study science more seriously. You might read a motivational book that pushes you to change your habits, maybe to eat healthier, to exercise more, or to study harder. Books are not just passive experiences. Sometimes they change the way we live. Let's connect this idea to language learning. If you read a book about someone who learned a new skill, like learning English or learning to play an instrument, their journey can motivate you. You might think, if they could do it, maybe I can too. And the more you read about learning strategies, the more ideas you collect for your own learning journey. Now let's explore the emotional side of reading. Books can make us feel a wide range of emotions. Have you ever laughed out loud while reading something funny? Or cried while reading a sad story? Or felt inspired by a character's bravery? Books allow us to experience emotions deeply and safely. When you read about a difficult situation, you can feel the tension and sadness without actually being in danger yourself. This emotional exercise helps you grow as a person. Think about it like this. Every book you read adds a little more color to your emotional world. If you only watch short videos or quick posts online, you often only experience one emotion at a time, like laughter, surprise, or curiosity. But in a book, emotions are layered. A chapter might make you laugh, then make you think, then make you feel sad, then give you hope. This emotional complexity is part of what makes us human. Now let me share another personal memory. When I was a teenager, I read a book called Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. This book is about a Jewish girl who lived during World War II. She wrote about her life, her fears and her hopes while hiding from danger. I remember feeling so many emotions while reading it: sadness, admiration, and inspiration. Even though Anne lived in a completely different time and situation, her words touched me deeply. That is the power of books. They connect people across time and space. So reading is not only about improving our language or intelligence. It is also about improving our humanity. It makes us wiser, kinder, and more thoughtful. Let's also think about how reading shapes communities. When people read the same book, they can share ideas, discuss, and debate. Book clubs are a great example. People gather, maybe once a week or once a month, to talk about what they read. In these conversations, you don't just learn from the book, but also from other people's perspectives. This helps you grow socially as well as intellectually. And here's a daily life connection. Imagine you're having lunch with colleagues or classmates. If you read books regularly, you always have something interesting to share. You might say, "Oh, I just read this fascinating book about space exploration." Or, "I was reading a novel that made me think about friendship differently." These little moments make conversations richer and more engaging. Reading gives you more material to connect with others. Finally, let's talk about reading as a habit for personal growth. Just like exercising keeps your body healthy, reading keeps your mind and soul healthy. If you make it a daily routine, even if it's just a few pages a day, you will see long-term benefits. Your language will improve, your thinking will become sharper, your emotions will be deeper, and your worldview will expand. So here's a practical tip for you. If you want to start building the habit of reading, don't push yourself to finish big, difficult books right away. Start small. Maybe choose a short story in English. Or read a children's book. It may sound simple, but children's books are actually great for learners because they use clear language and powerful messages. Once you enjoy that, you can slowly move to more complex books. The important thing is consistency. Even 10 minutes a day is better than nothing. So let's continue our journey into the world of books. We've already explored how reading helps with vocabulary, creativity, memory, discipline, empathy, and even mental health. But now I want to focus on something very practical: how to include reading in your everyday life, especially if you are an English learner. Because it's one thing to know that reading is good, and another thing to actually make it part of your daily routine. Let's start with a question. Have you ever said, "I don't have time to read"? If you have, you're definitely not alone. Most people think they are too busy. But here's the truth. Reading doesn't always mean sitting for hours with a thick book. Reading can be short, simple, and flexible. You can make reading part of your day in small ways. For example, instead of scrolling through your phone for 15 minutes in the morning, you could read a few pages of a book or an article. Instead of listening to random background noise on the bus, you could read an ebook. It's all about finding those little spaces of time. Let me share a simple story. One of my students, Daniel, used to tell me that he didn't have time to read. He was always busy with work, commuting, and family responsibilities. But when we talked about his daily routine, I asked him, "What do you usually do during your train ride to work?" He laughed and said, "Oh, I just play games on my phone or check social media." I suggested he try reading for 10 minutes instead. At first, he thought it was impossible. But after a week, he realized he had finished almost 50 pages of a book without even noticing. By the end of the month, he had read an entire book during his daily commute, just by changing one small habit. That's the power of finding time in small pockets. Another important question is, what should you read? There are so many options: novels, short stories, newspapers, magazines, blogs, biographies, self-help books, and more. The answer depends on your goal. If your goal is to improve your English vocabulary, novels and stories are great because they show language in context. If you want to learn about culture or current events, newspapers and magazines can be useful. If you want motivation or guidance, self-help books are excellent. And if you just want to relax, fiction and fantasy might be perfect. The key is to choose something that interests you. Because here's the truth. If you don't enjoy what you're reading, you won't continue. Reading should feel like a pleasure, not like homework. Imagine forcing yourself to read a book that feels boring or too difficult. You'll give up quickly. But if you choose a book that excites you, reading will become a natural part of your life. Here's another tip. Don't be afraid to read simple books in English. Many learners think, "I'm an adult, so I should read adult-level books." But that's not always the best approach. Children's books or young adult novels are fantastic for English learners. They often use clear language but still tell engaging stories. For example, books like Charlotte's Web or The Hunger Games are simple enough for learners, but also rich in themes and emotions. Once you get used to those, you can move on to more complex works. And let's not forget audiobooks. Some people say, "I can't focus when I read printed words." That's fine. Listening to audiobooks is also reading, just in a different form. In fact, audiobooks can be very helpful for English learners. You can listen while walking, cooking, or even before bed. And many audiobooks come with text versions, so you can read and listen at the same time. This helps you connect pronunciation with spelling and meaning. Now, let's connect reading with technology. Today, you don't always need to carry a heavy book around. You can have an entire library in your pocket with an e-reader or even on your phone. Apps like Kindle or Google Books allow you to read anywhere. You can highlight new words, look up meanings instantly, and even make notes. For English learners, this is very powerful. You don't have to interrupt your reading to search for a word in a dictionary. You can do it with a single tap. But of course, paper books have their own magic. Many people love the feeling of holding a book, turning the pages, and even smelling the paper. It feels personal and calming. Sometimes the physical act of holding a book makes the reading experience more enjoyable. So you can choose whichever format feels better for you. What matters is not the format, but the habit. Now let's talk about the types of benefits books give depending on what you read. If you read fiction, you enter other people's worlds. You meet characters, you follow their journeys, and you learn from their mistakes and successes. Fiction often reflects real life in creative ways. For example, reading about a character who faces fear or loneliness can make you reflect on your own emotions. If you read nonfiction, you gain practical knowledge. Nonfiction books teach you skills, history, science, and strategies. For example, reading a biography about Steve Jobs can inspire creativity and innovation. Reading a psychology book can help you understand human behavior better. Reading travel writing can introduce you to places you've never visited. Both fiction and nonfiction are important, because one develops your imagination and empathy, while the other expands your knowledge and understanding. Let me share another story. A few years ago, I had a student named Emma. She was very shy and didn't like speaking in class. She often worried that her English wasn't good enough. I encouraged her to start reading novels in English. At first, she chose very simple ones, like stories for teenagers. Slowly, she started enjoying them and even wanted to share parts of the stories with classmates. Over time, her confidence grew because she had more words, more expressions, and more ideas. She even started writing short summaries of the books she read. Today, Emma is not only a fluent English speaker, but she also says reading was the #1 reason she improved. So what lesson can we learn from Emma's story? That reading is not only about improving grammar or vocabulary. It's also about building confidence. When you read, you gain knowledge. And when you have knowledge, you feel stronger, more prepared, and more willing to share your ideas with others. Another way reading helps is by giving us perspective. Let's say you read a book about someone growing up in a country very different from yours. Maybe their traditions, food, or daily life are completely unfamiliar to you. But through the book, you begin to understand their world. This helps you see life from more than one point of view. And when you understand different perspectives, you become a more open-minded and tolerant person. In today's world, this skill is more important than ever. We live in a global society where we meet people from many cultures. Reading prepares you for these interactions. It makes you less judgmental and more curious. Instead of saying, "Oh, that's strange," you might say, "That's interesting. I read about something similar in a book." Now let's touch on another practical benefit. Reading improves writing. This is especially valuable for English learners. The more you read, the more you notice how sentences are built, how punctuation is used, and how ideas are organized. Without even realizing it, you start to copy those patterns in your own writing. For example, after reading several novels, you might start using dialogue naturally in your essays or stories. After reading news articles, you might learn how to write with clarity and directness. Reading is like food for your writing style. And here's a little challenge for you. After finishing a book, try to write a short summary in English. It doesn't have to be long, just a paragraph or two. This will not only improve your writing, but also help you remember what you read. It's like exercising your brain in two ways at once. Another small but useful tip: keep a reading journal. Every time you read, write down 1 or 2 new words or phrases you discovered. Write their meanings and maybe an example sentence of your own. Over time, you'll build a personal dictionary of vocabulary that actually matters to you. And because you found those words in a book, you'll remember them better. Finally, let's talk about the joy of finishing a book. Do you know that feeling of closing the last page and thinking, "Wow, I did it"? It's a feeling of accomplishment. It makes you proud because you invested your time in something meaningful. Unlike watching a video where the memory often disappears quickly, the memory of a book stays with you for a long time. Sometimes forever. I'll give you an example from my own life. When I finished reading The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I remember sitting quietly for a long time just thinking. The story was simple, but the lessons about following your dreams and listening to your heart stayed with me. Even today, years later, I still remember the key messages. That's the beauty of books. They leave marks on our minds and hearts. All right, let's move into something that I think is really exciting: the world of genres. A genre is basically a type or category of book. Just like we have different types of music, pop, rock, jazz, classical, we also have different types of books. And each genre gives us something unique. If you understand the different genres and try reading from them, you'll get not only more variety but also different benefits for your English learning and for your personal growth. So let's explore some of the most popular genres and see what they can teach us. Let's begin with fiction novels. Fiction means stories that come from imagination. They may be realistic, or they may be completely made up, but they are not presented as true. Fiction novels are great for English learners because they often use natural conversations, descriptions, and emotions. You can see how people talk, argue, laugh, and solve problems in English. For example, in a romance novel, you might learn how 2 people talk when they first meet, or how they express love and feelings. In a mystery novel, you see how detectives ask questions, search for answers, and describe clues. Fiction novels can improve your storytelling skills too. Imagine you want to tell a story to a friend about something that happened to you. If you've read a lot of novels, you already have a sense of how to make the story interesting, what details to include, how to build suspense, and how to end with a point. That's something you pick up unconsciously from reading fiction. Now let's look at romance books. Many people dismiss romance as light reading, but actually romance is a very powerful genre. Romance novels teach you vocabulary related to emotions, relationships, and daily life. You'll see words like admire, cherish, heartbroken, faithful, and so on. And because these words are connected to feelings, you remember them easily. On top of that, romance novels can be very engaging. You want to know if the 2 characters will end up together or not, so you keep reading. And the more you read, the more your English improves. Next, mystery and crime novels. These are among the most popular genres worldwide. Think about Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, or modern crime thrillers. Mystery novels are fantastic for building vocabulary around thinking, analyzing, and problem solving. You'll see words like suspect, evidence, alibi, motive, and detective work. You also practice following a complex story with many characters and clues, which strengthens your concentration and memory. Plus, mysteries keep you hooked. You want to find out who the criminal is. That makes reading exciting, not boring. Another genre is science fiction, often called sci-fi. These books imagine the future, space, technology, or new worlds. For example, books by Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke. Science fiction is great because it expands your imagination and gives you advanced vocabulary about science and technology. If you're interested in topics like robots, space travel, or artificial intelligence, sci-fi books can be both educational and fun. And remember, many technologies we use today, like cell phones or the internet, were once just science fiction ideas. Reading this genre connects you to the future. Now let's move to fantasy. Fantasy books are similar to science fiction, but instead of technology, they often use magic, mythical creatures, and imaginary worlds. Think of books like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. Fantasy is wonderful for learners because it gives you creative vocabulary, words like wizard, spell, kingdom, dragon. These words may not be useful in everyday conversation, but they make your reading experience richer and your imagination stronger. Fantasy also teaches universal themes like bravery, friendship, and hope, which can inspire you in your real life. Another powerful genre is historical fiction. These are stories set in the past, often mixed with real historical events. For example, a novel about World War II that tells the story of a family living during that time. Historical fiction is great because it teaches you both language and history at the same time. You learn how people lived in another time, what they wore, what they ate, how they spoke. This gives you cultural knowledge while also practicing English. Let's not forget biographies and autobiographies. A biography is the story of someone's life, usually written by another person. An autobiography is when the person writes about their own life. Reading about real people, leaders, artists, scientists, activists, gives you inspiration. You learn about their struggles, successes, and lessons. For English learners, biographies are helpful because they often use clear storytelling, moving step by step through a person's life. And you also pick up vocabulary related to real events, professions, and achievements. For example, reading the biography of Nelson Mandela teaches you not only about history, but also words related to politics, justice, and freedom. Reading the autobiography of Michelle Obama shows you vocabulary related to education, family, and leadership. These books give you both language and life lessons. Another popular genre is self-help. These books are designed to give advice and motivation. They might be about building confidence, managing stress, improving productivity, or developing habits. Self-help books are very practical for English learners because the language is usually clear and modern. You'll find phrases you can use in daily life like set your goals, manage your time, build resilience. Plus, the advice is useful for anyone, not just language learners. If you read something like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you're learning English and learning life skills at the same time. Next, we have nonfiction general knowledge. These are books about science, travel, psychology, business, or even cooking. They may not tell a story, but they explain ideas. For example, a psychology book might explain how the brain works. A travel book might describe countries and cultures. A business book might teach you how to start a company. These books are excellent for building subject-specific vocabulary. If you want to work in a certain field, reading nonfiction in English can give you both the language and the knowledge. Here's an interesting one: poetry. Many learners avoid poetry because they think it's too difficult. And yes, poetry can be challenging because it often uses metaphor and symbolic language. But poetry is powerful because it teaches you rhythm, sound, and emotion in English. Even reading simple poems, like those by Robert Frost or Maya Angelou, can give you a deeper feeling for the language. Poetry also connects to emotions quickly. A single line of poetry can make you feel something very strong, and that's a special experience. We also have short stories. These are perfect for English learners because they don't take much time. You can read one in a single sitting. Authors like O. Henry, Edgar Allan Poe, or modern short story writers give you quick but powerful experiences. With short stories, you practice beginning, middle, and end, all in a short time. They also make it easier to stay consistent with reading because you feel the success of finishing something quickly. Now let's connect genres to daily life. Imagine you're sitting with a group of friends or colleagues, and someone says, "I just read a great book." If you've explored different genres, you'll always have something to contribute. You might say, "Oh, I love mysteries," or "I just finished a biography about someone amazing." This makes conversations richer because you bring interesting ideas to the table. Here's a fun tip. Try mixing genres. For example, you could read a fantasy novel for fun and at the same time, a self-help book for personal growth. Or you could read a biography during the week and a mystery novel on weekends. This balance keeps your reading life exciting and varied. Let me share a story about another student named Karim. He told me he used to get bored when trying to read English books. Every time he started one, he stopped after a few pages. When I asked what kind of books he was reading, he said, "Only grammar practice books." No wonder he was bored. I suggested he try reading genres he enjoyed in his own language, but in English. He loved sports, so I recommended a biography of a famous football player. He loved movies, so I suggested a mystery novel. Suddenly, Karim started reading every day because he actually enjoyed it. His vocabulary grew, his confidence increased, and he no longer felt that reading was a chore. This shows us something important. Reading doesn't have to be boring or difficult. If you choose the right genre, it can be fun and exciting. And when reading is fun, it doesn't feel like study, but the learning still happens. So now I'd like you to think, what genre do you enjoy the most? Do you like romance, mystery, fantasy, history, self-help, or biographies? Think about which one excites you, and then try to find an English book in that genre. That's the best way to start. We have already talked about how books can help you relax, how they can open doors to new worlds, and how they give us knowledge. But the conversation about books never really ends, because every time we think about them, new ideas come up. That is the beauty of books. They keep giving again and again, and in today's continuation, I want to go much deeper. Let's start with something many of you probably already feel when you pick up a book. The way reading helps you escape from the noise of the world. Every day, especially in modern life, there are so many distractions. You have your phone buzzing with messages, videos popping up on social media, advertisements everywhere, people calling your name, and constant noise from traffic or the city. Sometimes it feels like there is no quiet moment at all. But when you sit down with a book, it's just you and the pages in front of you. The world becomes calm. You don't need headphones, you don't need the internet, you don't even need electricity if it's daytime, you just need the book. That kind of peace is becoming rare in today's world. Now let's compare this with watching TV or scrolling through your phone. These activities are entertaining, yes, but they often move so fast that your brain doesn't really have time to process everything. Reading, on the other hand, slows things down. When you read, you can pause. You can stop and think about a sentence. You can go back and read it again if you want to understand it more deeply. That is something you cannot do as easily with spoken media. Reading gives your brain the space to breathe, to think, to reflect. It's almost like meditation with words. Another important reason why reading books is valuable is because it helps us improve our focus and concentration. In the modern world, many people find it difficult to focus for long periods of time. We are used to checking our phones every few minutes, switching between tasks, or watching short videos. But when you sit with a book, you train your brain to stay with one thing for a longer time. Imagine you are reading a novel, and you get deeply involved with the story. You follow the characters, You imagine the setting. You keep reading chapter after chapter. You might sit for an hour without even noticing how much time has passed. That is concentration, and it's a skill that reading helps you practice. Let me give you an example. One of my students once told me that before he started reading books regularly, he couldn't sit still for more than 10 minutes without checking his phone. But after a few months of reading every night before bed, he noticed that he could sit and read for 30 minutes, then 45 minutes, and eventually an entire hour. His ability to focus grew stronger, and this helped him not only in reading, but also in studying for exams, and even listening in long meetings. Reading in this way is like a gym workout for your brain. Just like lifting weights makes your muscles stronger, reading books makes your attention span stronger. Now, let's talk about another amazing thing. Reading builds empathy. Empathy means the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. When you read a novel, you enter the life of the characters. You see the world through their eyes, you feel their emotions, and you experience their challenges. If the main character is sad, you feel sad. If the main character is excited, you feel excited. This practice of stepping into someone else's shoes makes us more understanding in real life. It helps us connect with people better. For example, if you read a novel about someone living in another country with a culture very different from your own, you begin to understand that culture. You may never have visited that place, but through the book, you learn how people live, how they think, and what they value. Later, when you meet someone from that culture in real life, you are able to connect with them more easily. You already know a little about their world. That is the magic of books. They break down walls between people and cultures. Books also encourage imagination. Every time you read, your brain paints pictures. Let's say the book describes a beautiful garden. The author might tell you about the roses, the sunlight, and the fountain in the middle. But the exact image in your mind will be unique to you. Someone else reading the same sentence will imagine a slightly different garden. This ability to imagine is very powerful because it trains your creativity. When you practice imagination, in reading, you also get better at solving problems, thinking of new ideas, and being innovative in real life. That's why so many creative people, artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, are also big readers. They feed their imagination with books. Now, I also want to mention something that is very practical. Reading improves your language skills. This is especially important for you, my listeners, because you are learning English. Reading books in English exposes you to new vocabulary, new sentence structures, and different writing styles. You learn words not just from a list, but in context. For example, instead of memorizing the word curious, you might read a sentence like, Daniel was curious about the old house at the end of the street. Now you see how the word is used and you can remember it more easily. Reading also shows you how grammar works in real situations. Sometimes when we learn grammar in class, it feels dry or confusing. But when you see grammar in a story, it feels natural. You don't just learn the rule, you see the rule in action. That makes it easier to understand and to use later when you speak or write. I remember one listener wrote to me and said that reading just one book in English every 2 months improved her vocabulary more than months of memorizing word lists. Why? Because she saw the words again and again in the story. Repetition is natural in books, and our brains love repetition. That's how we remember. Another point I want to share is that reading books can also improve your writing skills. When you read, you absorb not only words and grammar, but also style. You notice how authors describe things, how they build arguments, and how they structure their paragraphs. Let's also talk about reading as a source of inspiration. Many great leaders, inventors, and thinkers have said that books were their biggest teachers. For example, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, is known for being a passionate reader. He reads dozens of books every year, and he says that books help him explore new ideas and understand the world better. Similarly, Oprah Winfrey, a famous talk show host, has always spoken about how books changed her life and gave her the strength to achieve her dreams. So when you read, you are joining the same habit that many successful people share. And remember, reading does not always mean sitting down with a thick, serious book. It can be a light novel, a collection of short stories, or even a children's book. What matters is the habit of reading. Once you enjoy it, you will naturally move on to more challenging books. Now let's pause for a small activity. I want you, my listener, to think about the last book you read. It can be in English or in your own language. What was it about? What did you learn from it? And how did it make you feel? Take a moment to think. If you have a notebook, you can even write down your thoughts. Doing this kind of reflection helps you understand why reading matters personally to you. I want you to think about books not just as objects made of paper, but as time machines, teachers, and even friends. Yes, friends, because for many people, books are companions that stay with them through life. Think about a time when you felt lonely. Maybe you were traveling alone, maybe you had a tough day, or maybe you just needed someone to talk to. When you open a book, suddenly you are not alone anymore. The characters in the story become your friends. You listen to their voices in your mind. You follow their adventures, you share their struggles. Sometimes reading can make you laugh out loud, and other times it can bring tears to your eyes. That emotional connection is what makes books so unique. A movie may show you a story in 2 hours, but a book can live with you for weeks, sometimes even for years, and it becomes a part of your life. Now, let's think about books as time machines. When you read history books or historical novels, you can travel to the past. You can see what life was like hundreds of years ago. For example, if you read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, you suddenly step into the world of England in the early 19th century. You learn about how people dressed, how they spoke, how they thought, and what their daily lives were like. On the other hand, science fiction books allow you to travel into the future. They give you a picture of how technology, society, and even humanity itself might change. For instance, reading a novel like 1984 by George Orwell makes you think about freedom, control, and politics in ways that are still relevant today. Books are also cultural bridges. Every culture in the world has its stories, myths, and traditions, and books are the way those stories are passed down from one generation to another. When you read a book from another culture, you learn to appreciate their values, their struggles, and their way of life. You also see how much we all share as human beings, no matter where we come from. That's why reading world literature is so enriching. It connects us across time and space. Let me share a personal story with you. When I was younger, I used to read a lot of Russian literature, like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. At first I thought, oh no, these books are so long, how will I ever finish them? But then, as I read, I discovered not only Russian culture, but also universal human emotions: love, fear, ambition, sadness, and hope. Those stories made me realize that even though I live in a different country, in a different time, people everywhere have similar feelings. Books taught me that lesson much more deeply than any classroom ever could. Now let's talk about the health benefits of reading, because yes, reading can actually be good for your health. Studies have shown that reading reduces stress. Imagine you are feeling anxious after a long day. If you sit down with a good book and read for just 20 to 30 minutes, your heart rate slows down, your muscles relax, and your mind calms. It's like a mental spa. Reading before bed also helps many people sleep better because it creates a calming routine. Instead of looking at the bright screen of a phone, which can actually make it harder to sleep, you let your brain wind down gently with a book. And here is another fascinating fact. Reading helps keep your brain young. Scientists have found that people who read regularly are less likely to experience memory loss as they get older. Reading exercises the brain, keeping it active and flexible. Just like we need physical exercise for our bodies, we need mental exercise for our brains. And reading is one of the best exercises there is. Now, let's shift to something very practical. How can you, as English learners, use books in your daily life to improve not just your language, but also your habits? I know that sometimes reading in English can feel difficult. You see many new words, and you might feel frustrated. But here's my advice. Don't start with the hardest books. Start with something that you can enjoy and understand, even if it's a little bit challenging. For example, you can try reading children's books or young adult novels in English. These books usually use simpler language, but the stories are still very interesting. One of my favorite recommendations for English learners is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. It's a short book, the language is simple, but the ideas are very deep and meaningful. Another good choice is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. It's a children's book, but adults enjoy it too. And it teaches so much about friendship and kindness. If you want something a bit more modern, you can try books like Harry Potter. Many English learners love reading Harry Potter because the story is exciting and the language is clear. Once you get into the story, you don't even notice that you are reading in another language. You just want to know what happens next, and that motivation keeps you going. Another helpful tip is to use bilingual books, where you have the English text on one side and your native language on the other side. That way, if you don't understand something, you can quickly check the meaning without losing the flow of the story. But here's the most important thing. Make reading a habit. Even if you read just 10 minutes a day, that is enough to start. Over time, those 10 minutes add up. Think about it. If you read 10 minutes a day, that's more than an hour a week and more than 50 hours in a year. In 50 hours, you could finish several books. And every one of those books would give you new vocabulary, new ideas, and new ways of thinking. Another thing I recommend is keeping a reading journal. After you finish reading a chapter, write down 3 new words you learned and 1 idea or sentence that you liked. This simple habit makes reading more active. You are not just passively looking at words, you are engaging with them. Later, when you look back at your journal, you will see how much you have learned. Let's also think about reading as a family or community activity. Reading is often a personal, private thing, but it can also bring people together. Parents reading to their children, friends sharing favorite books, or book clubs where people discuss stories. All of these create a sense of connection. And in fact, discussing books can help you practice English even more. If you read a short story in English, why not tell a friend about it? Even if your friend has not read the story, you can summarize it for them. That's a great way to practice speaking, while also sharing something meaningful. Now let's move to another angle: books and technology. Some people think that books are old-fashioned, that in the age of the internet we don't need books anymore. But actually, technology has made books more available than ever before. With ebooks and audiobooks, you can carry an entire library in your phone or tablet. Imagine that, hundreds of books in your pocket. You can read on the train, on the bus, while waiting in line, or even while walking if you are careful. Audiobooks are especially helpful for English learners. You can listen to a book while reading along with the text. This way, you improve both your listening and reading skills at the same time. And because you hear the correct pronunciation, you also improve your speaking. For example, you might read a word like kernel and not know how to pronounce it. But when you hear it in the audiobook, you learn that it is pronounced kernel. These little details make a big difference in your confidence. Finally, let's remember that reading is not only about knowledge, it is also about joy. The simple pleasure of sitting with a book, turning the pages, and losing yourself in a story is something that no technology can replace. Yes, movies and games are exciting, but the magic of reading is unique. It's your imagination that creates the pictures, and that makes the experience personal. So, my dear listeners, I want you to think about what role books can play in your life, not only as tools for learning English, but as lifelong companions, sources of wisdom, and even windows to the world. Reading is not just a hobby. It is a habit that can change your mind, We've already explored many different benefits of reading, such as how books reduce stress, improve focus, build empathy, and help you learn languages. But there is still so much more to say, because books are truly endless in what they can give us. In this part of the episode, I want to take you on a journey through the history of books, the culture of reading around the world, and also some very practical tips on how you can make reading a part of your daily life. Even if you are busy, even if you sometimes feel unmotivated, and even if English books seem challenging. Let's begin with the history of books. Thousands of years ago, long before we had printed books, people used to tell stories orally. That means stories were passed from one person to another by speaking, not by writing. Think about it. Sitting around a fire at night, listening to an elder tell stories about the past, about gods, heroes, and lessons of life. This is how knowledge and culture survived from one generation to another. Later, people began to write on clay tablets, animal skins, and papyrus. In ancient Egypt, scribes would carefully write texts on papyrus scrolls, and these were the first books. Then came one of the most important inventions in human history, the printing press. In the 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in Europe, and suddenly books could be printed much faster and in much larger numbers than before. Before this invention, books had to be copied by hand, which was slow and expensive. Only rich people or religious institutions could own them. But with the printing press, books became cheaper and more widely available. This changed the world. Knowledge spread quickly. People became more educated. Ideas traveled across countries and continents. You could say that the printing press was one of the reasons for the great changes in history, like the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. Today, of course, books are everywhere, in libraries, bookstores, and even in our phones and computers. But it's important to remember that having access to books is still a gift. In some parts of the world, people don't have many books, and they truly treasure the few they have. I once read a story about children in rural Africa who walked for miles to borrow just one book from a traveling library. They would read it again and again and share it with their friends. For them, that one book was like gold. Doesn't that make us appreciate even more the books we have around us, sometimes sitting on our shelves without being opened? Now, let's talk about different cultures and their relationship with books. In Japan, for example, reading is a deeply respected activity. If you take a train in Tokyo, you will see many people quietly reading books or newspapers. They even have special bookstores called book cafes, where you can sit, drink tea, and read for hours. In Iceland, there is a tradition called Jólabókaflóð, which means Christmas book flood. Every Christmas, people give each other books as gifts, and then they spend the night reading. Isn't that beautiful? A whole country celebrating books together. In the Middle East, centuries ago, there were great libraries in Baghdad and Cairo where scholars collected books and knowledge from all over the world. These libraries became centers of learning, science, and philosophy. In Europe, the idea of the public library developed, where anyone, not just the rich, could borrow books and learn. And today, the internet has become the world's biggest library, giving us access to millions of books at our fingertips. But still, there is something special about holding a physical book in your hands. The smell of the paper, the sound of turning pages, the feeling of progress as you move from one chapter to another. It creates an experience that digital screens can't fully replace. Some people say that ebooks are convenient, but real books have a soul. Maybe you agree, maybe you prefer digital. Either way, what matters is the reading itself, not the format. Now let's get practical. I know many of you want to build a reading habit, but life can be busy. So how can you do it? Here are some tips. First, set a small, realistic goal. Don't say, I will read for 2 hours every day, because that can be overwhelming. Instead, start with just 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe read one chapter or even just a few pages. Once it becomes a habit, you can increase the time naturally. Second, choose the right book. If you choose a book that is too difficult or boring, you will quickly give up. Choose something that interests you. Do you like mysteries? Try a detective novel. Do you like love stories? Try a romance. Do you like history? Try a biography. Reading is like eating. If you don't like the food, you won't enjoy the meal. The same goes for books. Third, create a reading environment. Find a comfortable place where you can sit and read without distractions. Maybe it's your bedroom, maybe it's a quiet corner of a cafe, or maybe it's even the park. Some people like to read with a cup of tea, others like soft music in the background. Create a space that feels special, so your brain connects that place with reading. Fourth, carry a book with you. You never know when you'll have a few free minutes, waiting for the bus, standing in line, or even sitting in a doctor's office. Instead of scrolling on your phone, you can open your book. Those little moments add up, and suddenly you find yourself finishing books much faster than you expected. Fifth, combine reading with listening. This is especially good for language learners. Read a book while listening to the audiobook at the same time. This way, you train your eyes and your ears together. It helps with pronunciation, rhythm, and comprehension. Plus, it makes the story come alive. Sixth, make reading social. Join a book club, even an online one. Share your thoughts about a book with friends. When you know that you will talk about a book with someone else, you feel more motivated to finish it. And discussing it helps you understand the story more deeply. Finally, reward yourself. After finishing a book, celebrate. Maybe treat yourself to a nice coffee or watch the movie version of the book. Make reading feel like a joy, not a chore. Now let me share something interesting. Many successful people are avid readers. Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest investors, spends about 80% of his day reading. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, has said that he learned much of what he knows by reading books. Even leaders like Barack Obama and Nelson Mandela have spoken about the power of reading in their lives. These examples show us that reading is not just a hobby, it is a tool for growth, success, and wisdom. And here's a question for you, my dear listeners. What is your personal reason for reading? Is it for relaxation? For learning? For escaping into another world? Or maybe all of these? Think about it, because when you know why you read, it becomes easier to make it a habit. Another idea I want to share is about rereading. Sometimes people think that once they have read a book, that's it. But actually, reading a book a second or third time can be even more powerful. When you reread, you notice things you missed the first time. You understand the story more deeply. You connect with the characters in new ways. And if you are reading in English, you will understand more words and phrases the second time because you already know the context. So don't be afraid to read your favorite books again. One last thing for this segment. Books teach us patience. In our world today, everything is fast. We want instant results, instant messages, instant answers, but reading a book takes time. You cannot finish it in 1 minute. You have to move slowly, page by page, chapter by chapter. This teaches us to slow down, to appreciate the journey, not just the destination. And that lesson is valuable not only in reading, but in life. So let's keep exploring the importance of reading books. In the earlier parts of this episode, we talked about how reading can improve your imagination, your vocabulary, and your ability to think more deeply about ideas. But I want to dive even further, because reading is not just an activity you do alone. Reading has social benefits too. It can connect you with other people, help you find common interests, and even build your confidence when you are in conversations. Think about this. Have you ever been at a dinner table, maybe with friends, family, or colleagues, and people start talking about a topic, let's say history, psychology, or even a famous novel? If you've read something about that topic, suddenly you can join the conversation. You have something interesting to share, and you feel more confident. That is the power of reading. It gives you material, something to talk about, and it makes you feel part of the group. Without reading, sometimes you might feel left out. But when you read, you can connect more easily. Now let's consider another perspective. Reading helps you understand people. Books, especially novels and biographies, allow us to step into someone else's life. Imagine you are reading a story about a boy growing up in a small African village, or a young girl living in a busy Indian city. Through that story, you learn about their challenges, their dreams, and their emotions. Even though you may never visit that village or city, you feel closer to it because you understand a part of that culture. That's empathy. Reading builds empathy, which means the ability to feel what others feel. And empathy is so important in our daily lives, at work, in friendships, even in our family relationships. Another benefit of reading is that it reduces stress. In today's world, people are always busy, checking emails, scrolling on their phones, running from one place to another. Life is fast. But when you sit down with a book, everything slows down. It's just you and the story. Scientists have studied this and found that reading for only 6 minutes can reduce stress levels significantly. Isn't that amazing? Just 6 minutes of reading can calm your brain and make you feel relaxed. Let me give you a simple example from my own life. After a long day of work, sometimes I feel really tired and stressed. My phone is full of messages, my mind is full of tasks. But when I open a book, maybe a mystery novel or a book about self-improvement, I immediately feel a sense of peace. It's like I leave my busy life behind and enter another world. And after reading for half an hour, I feel more relaxed and even sleep better at night. Reading can really be like therapy. Now, some people ask, Natasha, isn't it the same if I just watch a movie or a TV show? Why should I read when I can watch something faster? That's a good question. Movies and shows are great, of course, and I enjoy them too. But reading gives your brain more exercise. When you watch a movie, everything is given to you, the visuals, the sounds, the characters' expressions. You don't have to imagine much. But when you read a book, your brain has to do the work. It has to create the images, imagine the voices, and build the setting. That exercise strengthens your brain, like lifting weights strengthens your muscles. That's why reading improves your memory, focus, and critical thinking skills more than watching a movie does. Also, books are often richer than movies. Many movies are actually based on books, but the movie usually has to cut out details because of time limits. For example, if you've ever read Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, you know that the books have much more detail about the characters, the places, and the emotions. The movies are exciting, yes, but the books give you a deeper experience. That's another reason reading is so important. Let's now talk about language learning. Since this podcast is about improving your English, I cannot forget this point. Reading books is one of the best ways to learn a language. When you read in English, you see words in context. You see how sentences are structured, how idioms are used, and how grammar works in real communication. This is more powerful than memorizing lists of words. For example, if you read a book and you come across the phrase break the ice, you can understand from the story that it means starting a conversation in a friendly way. The next time you are at a party, you can say, I tried to break the ice by telling a joke. That's real learning. One tip I always share with learners is, choose books that are interesting and suitable for your level. If you are at a B1 or B2 level, don't try to read very complicated books right away. Start with graded readers, which are books written for English learners. Or read young adult novels. They are easier to understand but still interesting. And gradually you can move to more advanced books. The key is enjoy the process. If the book feels like torture, you won't continue. But if you enjoy it, you'll keep reading, and little by little your vocabulary and grammar will grow. Another great idea is to read books aloud. Yes, aloud with your voice. Why? Because when you read aloud, you practice pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. You hear how the sentences sound in English. You train your tongue and your brain to work together. Even just 10 minutes of reading aloud every day can make a big difference in your speaking skills. Now let's look at another benefit. Books inspire action. Have you ever read a book that made you want to change your life? Maybe a fitness book that encouraged you to exercise more, or a financial book that taught you how to save money, or even a novel that inspired you to travel to a new country. Books are powerful because they are not just words on paper. They are ideas, and ideas can change people. For example, many entrepreneurs and leaders often say that a particular book changed their lives. Maybe it gave them a new way of thinking, or helped them make an important decision. For instance, there's a famous book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Many people who read it say it transformed the way they manage their time and their goals. Another example is Atomic Habits by James Clear, which teaches small steps to improve your habits. These books are not just entertainment. They are tools for life. And that's the magic of reading. You never know which book will give you that aha moment, the one idea that changes your perspective completely. Now, I also want to talk about the difference between physical books and ebooks. Some people love the feeling of holding a real book, turning the pages, and even smelling the paper. Others prefer ebooks because they are lighter, cheaper, and easy to carry on a phone or tablet. Which is better? Honestly, both are good. What matters is not the format, but the habit of reading itself. If you love ebooks, use them. If you prefer printed books, go for them. The important thing is, read regularly. Before I move forward, let's imagine a simple daily routine that includes reading. Suppose you wake up in the morning, make your coffee or tea, and then spend 15 minutes reading a book. It's a calm start to your day, better than immediately scrolling on your phone. Or imagine you are on the bus or train going to work. You can use that time to read. Even just 10 minutes during lunch break or before going to bed can make a huge difference. Reading doesn't have to take hours. Small, consistent habits are powerful. And here's another thought. When you read more, you also write better. Writing and reading are connected. When you see good writing in books, clear sentences, strong vocabulary, beautiful expressions, you naturally learn how to write better yourself. This can help you in school, at work, and even in personal communication, like emails or letters. So reading is not just passive. It actively improves the way you express yourself. In our previous discussions, we explored how reading builds empathy, improves focus, reduces stress, and strengthens both language and imagination. But today, I want to dive even deeper and explore more dimensions of why reading is truly essential, not just for learning English, but for enriching your entire life. Let's begin by thinking about genres. Did you know that different types of books can benefit you in unique ways? For example, fiction, novels, and short stories helps you understand human emotions, motivations, and social situations. When you read a story about a character facing a moral dilemma, your brain starts thinking about choices and consequences, about what you would do in their place. This mental exercise improves your critical thinking skills. You can imagine scenarios, explore alternative solutions, and develop a sharper, more reflective mind. Nonfiction, on the other hand, provides knowledge about the world. Reading biographies, history books, or science books introduces you to new facts and ideas. For example, if you read a biography of Marie Curie, you learn about her groundbreaking scientific discoveries, but also about her perseverance, discipline, and determination. These lessons are practical. They show you how to overcome obstacles, manage challenges, and grow as a person. Even books about psychology or communication teach you how to understand human behavior and interact more effectively with others. Poetry deserves a special mention. Many people underestimate its power, but poetry can teach you expression, rhythm, and emotional intelligence. Reading poetry allows you to explore language in a more artistic and nuanced way. It sharpens your ability to feel deeply and notice the beauty in everyday life. Poems often use metaphors and symbols, which make your mind work creatively to interpret them. That's an exercise in imagination and abstract thinking that even novels sometimes don't provide. Let's also consider the benefits of reading classical literature. Classics like To Kill a Mockingbird, 1984, or The Great Gatsby are often studied in schools for a reason. They provide insights into historical contexts, social issues, and moral questions. Beyond the story itself, reading these books teaches you to think critically about society, justice, freedom, and morality. They expose you to richer language and complex sentence structures, which improves both your reading comprehension and your writing skills. Now, let's talk about the connection between reading and personal growth. Books are mirrors. When you read, you often find reflections of your own thoughts, emotions, and experiences. For instance, a character struggling with self-doubt can make you reflect on your own fears and insecurities. You can learn strategies to cope, ways to think differently, or even just feel less alone knowing that someone else, even a fictional character, has faced similar challenges. This process of reflection is what makes reading deeply transformative. Reading also encourages lifelong learning. Many people stop learning formally after school or university, but the truth is that learning never really ends. Books are a key to continuous growth. They allow you to explore new subjects at your own pace, revisit old topics with fresh perspectives, and discover ideas you never considered before. For example, someone who studies engineering might pick up a book about philosophy or history and suddenly start thinking about their work and life in entirely new ways. Let's start with something many learners ask. How do you choose the right book? This is very important because choosing a book you enjoy can make the difference between developing a lifelong habit and giving up after a few pages. First, consider your interests. Ask yourself, what topics excite me? Do I like mysteries, adventure, history, biographies, science, or romance? Reading something that genuinely interests you keeps you motivated and makes learning English easier. When you enjoy the story, you naturally absorb vocabulary, grammar, and expressions without even realizing it. Second, consider your current level. If your English level is B1 or B2, avoid extremely difficult books at first. You don't want to feel frustrated by too many unfamiliar words or complex sentence structures. Instead, start with graded readers, which are books specifically designed for learners at different levels. These books use simpler vocabulary and grammar but still tell engaging stories. Gradually, you can move on to original novels, short stories, or even newspapers and magazines. Third, think about length and format. Sometimes long books can feel overwhelming, so starting with short novels or short story collections can be a better option. You can also try audiobooks or ebooks, Ebooks are convenient because you can carry several books on your phone or tablet and read whenever you have a few free minutes. Audiobooks are excellent because you can listen while following along with the text, which helps with pronunciation, listening comprehension, and overall fluency. Now, let's talk about the importance of setting reading goals. A goal doesn't have to be huge. For example, you might decide to read for just 15 minutes every day, or finish one chapter a day. The key is consistency. Small daily habits accumulate into significant progress over time. Imagine reading 15 minutes a day. In 1 week, that's more than an hour and a half of focused reading. In a month, it adds up to 6 or 7 hours. In a year, that's more than 70 hours spent reading, enough to finish many books. Another great strategy is to keep a reading journal. This can be a notebook or a digital document where you write down the books you are reading, the chapters you finish, new words you learn, and ideas or reflections you have. For example, if you read a novel and come across an interesting phrase like a blessing in disguise, write it down, note the meaning, and try to use it in your own sentences later. This way, reading becomes an active process, and your vocabulary improves much faster. Now, let's explore reading as a way to develop critical thinking. Books are not just stories. They are ideas. When you read, especially nonfiction, you encounter different perspectives and arguments. For example, reading a book about climate change might present scientific data, historical facts, and opinions about what we should do. As you read, you start to analyze these ideas. Do I agree? Why or why not? What would I do in this situation? This kind of thinking is incredibly valuable because it trains your mind to evaluate information critically, not just accept everything you read or hear. Even fiction can improve critical thinking. When you read a novel, you often encounter dilemmas and decisions that characters must make. You ask yourself, what would I do in their place? Was their choice right or wrong? Why did the author make the character act this way? These questions develop reasoning, perspective-taking, and moral reflection, all of which are important skills in life and work. Let's also discuss reading for creativity. Many people underestimate how much reading fuels imagination. When you read, your brain creates the settings, the characters, and the action. You imagine the scene in your mind, what the city looks like, what the character is wearing, how they move. This mental visualization exercises your creativity. Writers, artists, and innovators often credit reading as a source of inspiration. The more you read, the richer your imagination becomes. Another important point is that reading strengthens your focus and concentration. In our modern world, with social media, videos, and constant notifications, it's easy to get distracted. Reading forces you to slow down and concentrate for longer periods. This improves attention span, patience, and the ability to process information deeply. Even reading for 20 minutes a day can have a noticeable effect on your ability to focus. Not just while reading, but in other areas of your life, like studying, working, or solving problems. Let's consider reading as a tool for self-improvement. Many people read books about personal development, time management, communication, or productivity. These books not only provide knowledge, but also inspire action. For example, after reading Atomic Habits by James Clear, a person might start a new habit of waking up early or exercising regularly. After reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, someone might improve their planning skills, set priorities, or communicate more effectively. Books give ideas, strategies, and examples that you can apply in real life. Reading also helps improve writing skills. The more you read, the more you internalize grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structures. When you see examples of well-written sentences and paragraphs, you unconsciously learn how to write better. This applies not just to creative writing, but also to emails, essays, reports, or even social media posts in English. Reading exposes you to natural language patterns that are difficult to learn through memorization alone. Let's talk a bit about emotional intelligence. Reading stories allows you to experience different emotions, understand characters' feelings, and develop empathy. For example, a story about someone overcoming hardship can make you reflect on your own challenges. You learn to recognize emotions, both in yourself and in others, and this helps in relationships, communication, and personal growth. Emotional intelligence is a skill that is valued in every area of life, from professional settings to personal interactions. Now, I want to share some practical ways to make reading a permanent habit. First, integrate it into your daily routine. Set a specific time for reading every day, morning, afternoon, or evening. Even 15-20 minutes consistently is better than long, irregular sessions. Second, choose books that excite you. If the topic or story is interesting, you will naturally want to continue. Third, create a reading-friendly environment. A comfortable chair, good lighting, and minimal distractions can make reading more enjoyable. Fourth, combine reading with listening. Audiobooks allow you to listen while following along with the text, improving both comprehension and pronunciation. Another tip is to read aloud occasionally. Reading aloud helps you practice speaking skills, intonation, and expression. It's especially helpful for English learners because you hear the correct pronunciation and rhythm, while reinforcing vocabulary and grammar. You can read dialogue from a novel, a poem, or even news articles aloud. This dual practice improves both listening and speaking naturally. Finally, I want to emphasize that reading is a lifelong habit. Even after finishing school or university, books remain a source of knowledge, inspiration, and personal growth. Many successful people are avid readers. Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Barack Obama, and many others attribute part of their success to reading. They read not only for work, but also to explore ideas, expand their understanding, and think creatively. Remember, dear listeners, reading is not just an activity, it is an investment in yourself. Each book you read adds knowledge, skills, empathy, and perspective. It shapes your mind, your language, and even your character. Whether you read for education, pleasure, or personal development, the benefits are profound and lasting. Books have the power to change your life, one page at a